Good afternoon and welcome to the W Marketplace live event. We have a weekly event where we generally profile sellers and some of the products that they're selling on the marketplace. But today we wanted to do something a little bit different. We are the economic engine for women, and today we thought it was really important, given current affairs, to talk about what that economic engine means and giving women economic power. So, current affairs, we have all been talking about what's happening in Texas and what that means to women in general. And so, we started to look at finding the fiercest gender advocate that we knew and asking her to come and have a conversation with me. And some of you know Gloria Feldt, and Gloria and I have had lots of conversations in the past about the work she's doing, the organization that she leads today called Take the Lead, and her goals and her undying passion to create gender parity. And so when all of this started to happen and we started to talk about what can women do, we turned to the expert. And so with that, I want to introduce Gloria and welcome her. Gloria, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Kate. I would say I'm delighted to be here, but as we have discussed, this is a hard one. This is a hard one to move myself back into this framework after moving myself really fully into where I believe the issues lie, which are exactly where you said, the economic engine, the bigger picture of women's rights, whether women have the power, whether they have the position. That's really, for me, what the passion of my life is. And this is a piece of it.
You bet. So, Gloria, I want to do, before we talk about today, I want to do a little bit of historical level setting. Because when we were thinking about, we all got dismayed this week and thought, oh, what can we do and how can we do that? And I want to talk about that. But I also thought, with your history and that you have been down this road. And I think it's really important for people to really understand this is not something brand new that happened to us. I was, kind of getting ready for our conversation, and I was looking through the news and knowing that, just so our audience is clear, that you were the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation. And, I was sort of looking, and I found an interview that you did in 1997. And I was reading it, and they were talking about a pro-choice president and a leader of Congress that was very conservative, and the dichotomy and what you were going to do and what you thought. And so I thought it was really interesting. And just to level set a little bit about where you were in that mind at that point, and then I want to move forward.
Go for it.
So, I was thinking when you talked about this and you were talking about, one of the most amazing things you did was really take the conversation out of being restricted to women's reproductive rights. And I think that that's so interesting, and build that conversation into a women's right conversation. And so when we think about this today, I think it's got to be a little bit disheartening to think, oh my gosh, we haven't moved anywhere. And so when you think today and say, okay, what can we do today? How do we focus? What should the conversation be around to be productive and active versus I'm really mad about Texas?
Great way to get started, Kate. A very provocative way. And you're absolutely right. It is important to know your history if you want to create the future that you believe is the best future for yourself, your daughters, your granddaughters, and the world, as far as that goes. So, I was thinking as I was getting ready for this, that probably most people don't know that it was exactly 100 years between 1873, when the Comstock laws were passed. The Comstock laws made it illegal to provide anyone with information even about birth control. Birth control, okay? Right. Not like there was a lot of birth control choice in 1873. But anyway, women have always, since the beginning of time, women have figured out ways to control their fertility, to have children when they want them and not to have children when it's not the right time for them for whatever reason. So it's not a new thing in this world. It was exactly 100 years from the Comstock laws outlawing birth control to 1973, when Roe v. Wade was decided, based on the right to privacy. Now, the things that people need to know about that are twofold. Number one, the right to privacy was used in 1965 to decide the Comstock case, in which birth control was made legal in the United States. Now, it is unthinkable to most young women today to even imagine that birth control was not always readily legal, accessible, and available, but it has not always been. And so, I had a conversation with a young woman the other day who's an Olympic wrestler. And she said, well, the guys are all talking about, they mostly have wives and families and children, and the women athletes are all single, and they're all talking about how do they decide when they're going to have children. And I said to her, this is a problem you should be glad you have, because you have the ability to make that choice and to decide when is the right time for you. But we don't always know that was the history. So the second point I want to make is that if and when, and I think it's a when now, when Roe is overturned, it's been useless for a long time, but we'll talk about that later. Right. It will also take away the right to birth control. In addition to that, some of the gay rights cases have been decided on the same jurisprudence. So folks need to understand it is not a small issue. Now, for me personally, I first got involved in the civil rights movement in the 1960s or so, 60s, 70s, something like that. And so for me, it all started out fighting for racial justice, and realize and believe, because of my belief that everyone has the right to equality, to have an equal chance in the world, just to have an equal chance to thrive, to be able to deliver to whatever their talents are, to be able to contribute those talents to the world. And so that's where I started. And from there, it became evident to me that we had a lot of work to be done for women to have civil rights. And it was at that point that I started really focusing on expanding women's civil rights. So this is, to me, it's a civil rights issue for women to be able to decide their childbearing.
Well, and I think that that's a really key point that I really want to pause for a minute and say, we are talking about civil rights. We are not talking about only reproductive rights. We're talking about the right to treat women and view women as equals.
There you go.
Which is, as you've said, that is not the law yet. That has been proposed, and it didn't pass at the time. But it is civil rights that we're talking about. And that is akin to, as you said, the civil rights movement, racial justice, LGBTQ. I mean, we've got to take it out of an isolated incident that it is being put in an emotional, isolated way versus a civil rights. And I applaud you for that. And I think that is one of the key points, huge contribution that you have made.
Well, thank you. But, there are many people along the way who've said similar things. I mean, we all quote Hillary Clinton saying women's rights are human rights. And when she said that, and I was in the room in Beijing when she said it the first time in 1995, it was very controversial, because in every culture almost on the face of the earth, for most of human history, women have been second-class citizens. And so much of this is so deeply ingrained in our culture. There's so much bias and discrimination and misogyny that is deeply ingrained in our culture. It's not that the people or the people sitting next to you necessarily are deliberately trying to make women less than equal, but but there are just things in our culture that still need to be changed in order for women to truly have equality. We have opened many doors. We have changed many laws. We've seen a woman first almost everything. So a lot of progress has been made. There's no question of that. But there's still a lot yet to be done.
Well, and I think that that is the perfect thing to talk about in terms of there is still so much to be done. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about what do we do now? Do we all, you know, I have to say, I applaud some of the social efforts that have gone on to, you know, overwhelming websites and things like that are great. But I also think that there's got to be some thoughtful, longer term solutions and discussions that have to have, because, you know, as we talk every day, one of the solutions is, you know, pointing out language that has been systemic and taught, and just, you know, the colloquialisms that we say, or the assumptions that we make. But in this case, you know, as you and I talked about this the other day, I was really energized when you said, this is a chance to, you know, kind of pull ourselves together, and could be a time of dramatic change because we have an opening.
Right.
And that's such a different way to look at it. You know, we're all sort of dismayed by, oh my gosh, what do we do? But let's talk about what are some things, you know, I was really energized by some of the things that you pointed out that we can do. What are the actions? What do you think?
Well, here's the thing, that anything that is controversial, and something is controversial, it means that people are paying attention to it. It wakes people up. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean when I say this is a moment when we can actually make some big change, because for the most part, we're all kind of living our lives, doing the best we can. You know, what are we having for dinner? And, you know, just trying to make ends meet, and take care of our kids and our family, and, you know, deal with sick people and what, you know, I mean, life is like that. Life is like that. We all have to deal with those things. But when something is controversial in the public square, that is the moment when you have a platform. Mm-hmm. But in order to make use of that platform, the first thing that has to be done is define the terms of the discussion, mm-hmm. and not have the discussion on somebody else's territory. Have the discussion where you want the discussion to be, where you believe the discussion should be, and really power it up and put it, I call this wearing the shirt of your convictions. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when you asked me to do this, I first said no, because I'm like, you know, this isn't my gig anymore. I did that. I've been there, done that, got lots of t-shirts. But then I realized that if I teach other women to wear the shirt of their convictions, then I have to wear the shirt of my convictions too. Mm-hmm. And I certainly believe that the decision about whether and when to have children is a human right that women should have, and a civil right that women should have. And that to me is, this is the moment when we can start making that message clear, because people are paying attention, and we can encourage people to think of it in those terms. It is about whether women will have an equal place in at life's table, whether they'll be able to be the economic engine. Right. Those are the big questions, and these are the values. I mean, these are high, beloved values of most people, mm-hmm. that you have the ability to make personal decisions yourself about things like whether and when to have children. And that's a high, you know, we need to be on that values level and not be arguing fine points.
I love that. And that's exactly what it is. You know, the details are the access to birth control, and the way in which laws are implemented. But the bigger issue is, are women going to be treated and thought as equal? And, you know, my passion, my shirt, is the economic engine, because I am a firm believer that if women have the same economic power, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Mm-hmm. We Absolutely. Would mm-hmm. just not. And so, right. You know, I am absolutely convicted to that, to a fault, sometimes some would say.
Well, I'm
absolutely convicted to that.
No, it's right. No, to be equal citizens, women need two things. Number one, they need to be able to own and control their own bodies and their fate of their bodies. And yep. The second thing is they need to be able to earn money so that they can have independence, whether or not they're in partnership with someone else. They need to know that they can actually support themselves, because when you can do that, you don't have to be in a bad relationship. You don't have to become the victim of so many of the kinds of abuses that women have always had to deal with in their lives. If you can control your body and you can control your money, you can be an equal citizen.
You bet. And we need to fight for that. So there's two other things that I want to talk about in that way. So one is, as an equal citizen, as a responsible citizen, we have a voice, we have a vote. And so we talked about, what can we do politically in our own place to turn the tide or to make our voices heard?
Right.
I mean, what's your thought on that?
When I wrote my last book, my book before the new book that I have now called Intentioning, but the book before that was called No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power. And when I wrote that book, I started that study of women's relationship with power because I saw the disparity in the number of women who were in elected office. And I couldn't figure out why, because at that point, women were as able to raise money as men, and they were, trusted more than men. And the truth was, women didn't run as often as men. You can't win if you don't run. So that was like, okay, big wake up call right there. Number one, we need to know we do have the power. We need to know we do have the power. But the second thing that I realized when I did that study was that that the dynamics were the same in every sector. So in the business sector, even in the nonprofit sector, in professions, it doesn't matter. The dynamics were the same. Women were half the workforce, but like under 20% of the top leadership. So we have to put ourselves forward, and we have to take those leadership. We have to first aspire to them. We have to have the intention to have them. That's what intention is about, is to have the intention to have those positions. And so that we do share equally in the power, in the pay, and in the positions. And that, that's the first thing that needs to happen. But we also have to use our voices along the way. Must use our voices along the way. And I would like to see all of the women who are now in executive positions, who are only there because they have had the right to make their childbearing decisions on their own. They've had the right to get educated. They've had the right to, they've had all these doors open for them. I would like to see those women form some kind of a coalition, because it's less frightening to do it in a group than it is for one lone voice. So I want to see that happening. And I really believe that women in the business world have such a powerful voice that can be utilized to influence not only, I would say, the hearts and minds of people in the public, but also political leaders as well. And then hopefully a subset of them will decide they want to run for office, and that will be the next step.
Well, and I think, if those business leader women would begin to put pressure on their companies, we've seen that model work in recent years, right? Mm-hmm. Me Too, Black Lives Matters, all of it. We need to see that kind of pressure to support civil rights for women. And I think that that's going to be a really interesting thing, because, I have been struck by the silence we have heard from major corporations. And I think that's because of the conversation becomes, if we sort of let the conversation be emotional or religious or, moral, versus what we're talking about is civil rights for women, and change that discussion. And so I'm hoping that we can build that and support that coalition of strong women, whether they are in big corporations or business owners that we have on the W Marketplace, or our partners, or any of those people, to stand up and say, listen, we are going to demand civil rights for women.
And that's how we get to full equality. And there are certain specific pieces of legislation that can be passed, that are already available to pass, that have already been written, that are, that with the proper amount of pressure can start that ball rolling. And for example, it really astonishes people when they realize that women were not in the Constitution, and or specifically, and as a result that there were a lot of discriminatory laws that were accepted for so many years. Mm-hmm. Finally, the first mention of women in the Constitution was in 1920, when women ostensibly got the right to vote. But as we know, for women of color, it was years after that before there was full women's suffrage for all women. And then we're still battling some of the same kinds of voter suppression issues that were the Jim Crow laws. Mm-hmm. These are going to affect everybody. So it's not, there's never a one and done when you're going for public policy. I would say that. But wouldn't it be a great bookend if in 2021, the 101st anniversary of the suffrage amendment, since last year was kind of a lost year for all the celebrations we had intended to celebrate the 100th year, if the Equal Rights Amendment were to pass, because that is the next thing that should be in the Constitution. Very simple. Just, women are citizens too, with the same rights and responsibilities as everybody else, right? And then we need to move on to the Equal Pay Act, which has been languishing and needs to be brought up. Yep. And then we need to move on to the Freedom of Choice Act, which very simply says the government can't tell you when and whether to have children, period.
And those are all fantastic. I mean, and I think, when you say that, I think about John Adams thinking his wife was joking with him when she said, please don't forget about the women. Mm-hmm. Right? Thought it was kidding. The second one, the Equal Rights Amendment was 1975, first proposed.
I believe it might have been before that. I seem to remember 1972, but I'm not good with numbers. So, girls don't do well with numbers. You know that.
Don't even say it. And the Freedom of Choice Act has been on the table since 2006. The last rendition of it was 2006. I looked it up today.
Oh, okay, good. Well, but it was it's been around since before that. But yes, that was the last rendition of it.
That was the last rendition. So I thought, okay, that's a long time. So I mean, there's so much we can do, and I think that you were so right in terms of mobilizing our corporate sisters and our business owner sisters, and pushing our own legislative representatives to wake up and pass those bills, right? Do something about them, because they've been written. Let's, turn an eye towards women's civil rights.
Right.
That would be my hope.
And I would also say, we tend to think about it at the federal level, but the states are very important as well. What's happening locally on the ground, so many people don't even know who their state legislator is. And so that's why there are so many states now that are passing these kinds of laws, and that it wouldn't happen if the majority voices, and the majority voices we know over and over and over again, the polling tells us over and over and over again that the majority really does not like these draconian laws, that the majority really does believe that there should be gender equality. I mean, we're seeing now, particularly among millennials, they don't even want to work in companies that are not diverse, for example. They will deliberately choose to work in companies where there's greater equality and diversity. So it's a sound business decision for a company to come out publicly in favor of equal rights.
It is. It's such a good thing. I love it. So I want us to pause and find out if there's any questions that any of our viewers have, and sort of see if there's any of that. I have one, if not, because I've gotten it today already. I'll give it a minute. But so while we see if there's any questions, one of the things that I've been asked, and I got asked on social media, was, what about the men?
Oh, good question. Very good question.
And so what do you think? I mean, what do you say?
Well, I mean, first of all, the point is often made that a woman doesn't get pregnant by herself. There's generally a man involved. Generally, a man is intimately involved, shall we say. And that man should bear equal responsibility for whatever the consequences are of that pregnancy, whether it's choosing to carry a child forward, or whether it's choosing not to do so. And that it's patently unfair and misogynistic to put all of the responsibility and burden on the woman. So that, think about that. Just, that's just something to crystallize in our own minds. But I also believe that there are so many men now who do want to support equal rights for women. I teach a course called Women, Power, and Leadership at the college level from time to time, and it's co-listed between Women and Gender Studies and the business school. Mm-hmm. As a consequence of that, I typically have 25% or so men in the class. And very often they'll come in and have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. And mostly they took it because they thought it sounded like an easy 3-hour class. And then they get really interested and intrigued when they hear the data, mm-hmm. and what it means for them and their families, their mothers, their girlfriends, their wives, whatever, that they're realizing that, wait, gender equality affects me personally.
Right.
It affects our family pocketbook if there's not equal pay. It affects everything. And so I think the good news is that more and more men really want to step up and be part of this effort to bring about full gender equality. And I think we need to make sure that they have the opportunities to do that. And we need to hear men's voices as well as women's voices. And again, we tend to think about having a women's march, but how about a men's march for reproductive freedom? How about that?
How about a civil rights march?
There you go. Yes.
So, yeah. Gloria, this has been so fabulous. I do want to touch on one other thing. You have a book coming out, and I want to highlight, because I think it fits so nicely into this, into when you talk about intentioning. And what we are doing is talking to people today about being intentional about supporting gender equity. And I think that that's a really, it's so timely of you to be releasing this book this month. And so I thought this is a great opportunity. So tell us about intentioning.
Thank you so much. I will do that. And in fact, I will even show a picture of it so that everyone, hopefully, I don't know if you can see that.
There it is.
There you go. Yeah. So intentioning is a verb I made up myself because I wanted to answer the next question after the question of whether women will embrace their power, which was the question I asked in No Excuses. The next question has to be the power to what? To what end? So what if I tell you have all this power? So what? What are you going to use it for? And intentioning is deliberately turning intention into a verb, an active verb, so that we understand it as it's not just about having ambition. It's not just about thinking maybe I might want to do something. It's about saying, oh, heck yes, I'm doing it. I see it already. It's happening. I can do it. And so what I do in this book is I give women 9 leadership intentioning tools that specifically will help them with the thinking process they need to go through in order to identify what is their purpose and how do they then set their intentions higher than they ever thought they might have. And then how do they actually achieve that? Now, I wrote this book. I started writing it well before the pandemic, but then came the pandemic, and then first came the coronavirus pandemic, and then came the pandemic of racial injustice that has been around forever, but was finally made obvious by the George Floyd murder. And so we had these 2 things happening that had people agitated in many different kinds of ways. So another piece of the book is just to understand that it's kind of coming back to where we started, which is that moments of disruption, moments of controversy, those are the times when you can actually go forward the fastest and make the biggest changes, because people are forced to open their minds and think differently. And so intentioning both, I hope, will provide with some inspiration in order to understand that the world may be kind of screwed up right now, but it's a time when we can make it a whole lot better. But then also, I'm a real practical activist, so I wanted to give people some very specific tools and tips. And there is a chapter on what about the men, by the way.
Perfect. Perfect. And I think the timing is great. And so I want to leave people with three things is one, just sort of in general, be intentional. Two, again, rally your strong women around you, our sisters and our husbands and our community to think about and really speak up to corporate America and business to say something about this, about civil rights for women. And three is politically, we will post somewhere, I'm sure, these bills to, kind of push this forward because that is grassroots political effort, whether it's at the federal level, it's at the state or the local level. Would love everyone to think about women's equal rights and the EPA again. And then the last thing I would say, we are going to put a hashtag that Gloria and I have been talking about that I believe that you use, which is so meaningful, is what was it? Hashtag put women at the center.
That's it.
Because that's what we're doing right now. We are fighting for our civil rights. And I so appreciate you inspiring us and being willing to talk to us because, gosh, wouldn't it be great if 2021 were that year? We could say, oh my gosh, we made all of this significant progress and we only have a short period of time to do it.
And well, I want to say how meaningful it is to me to be in sisterhood with you and with other women like you to accomplish these things, because we know what the call to action is. We actually do have the power to do this if we all join together and with a plan and a strategy and are willing to wear the shirt, speak up. We can do this.
I love that. Thank you, Gloria.
Thank
you all. Appreciate it.